Hi, guys. Welcome to the Lit Mag Lab podcast. This is Vevna Forrow. Yeah, let's get started. All right, guys. So, if you listen back to the past podcast episode or just tuning into this one now, I was talking about, how to handle negative feedback and reviews. As a writer, as an artist, there's a comment section in a lot of places where we share our work, right? And, we get, feedback on our work from time to time, and it can, sometimes, some of it brings us to tears totally or impacts us. But I was trying to discuss how I dealt with, negative reviews and feedback over the years, when sharing my work and things that helped me, you know. And yeah, so listen to that if you'd like. And for this episode, I want to talk about something on the, Lit Mag journal construction side. So yeah. What software, do you use for creating a literary magazine or journal? What's out there, like platforms and tools to, build the issues, right? So, yeah, I'll share. I usually start, again, with like some personal shares and stuff and lead up to, some recommendations and things like that. So, yeah, I haven't, used any Adobe products in like several years or nearly a decade now. So I think back in 6th or 8th grade was the last time I ever used, either 6th, 7th, or 8th grade was the last time I ever used Adobe Photoshop, like literally. And that was like for a digital image. The class was called digital imaging, and basically they should have just called it like graphic design and photography, basically, or introductory classes or something. Basically, we had like assignments where we would, have cameras, right? Digital cameras, silver digital cameras. And we would, go around sometimes in the back of the school area and do, snapshot assignments, right? Try to take surrounding photos and things like that. And from time to time, we had, some assignments to, create various things in Adobe Photoshop or various, programs. I think it was all Adobe Suite products, though. And it was like a tiled, image pattern one. And then mine turned out to be like orange blobs and blue blobs in a square grid. And then I did this clown circus collage, and for our final project, it was like a video type thing, and mine ended up being like, when I was like, sketching a lot back in the days, right? So mine consisted of a young boy going to school, getting, either dropped off or picked up, and in a car, from their parents picking them up in the car. Like my dad used to pick me up from school a lot, right? All the time, and because I lived pretty close, to the school. It was, you technically could walk, I guess, but it's still quite a ways, to and from the school, but it's a straight road, yeah. And typically, and it was, and so it was a lot of images and back to back to back, of me like just drawing a line. Every time I would draw a line, I'd take a photograph. It wasn't so much like stop motion animation. I guess it could be considered that, but more so it's just like several snapshots of a lot of line drawings I did of the young boy getting picked up from school, and a little bit into his day. I think I can't remember exactly, but I just remember the end scene being like, him with his backpack, and then a car that sort of tried to draw one similar to like one my fam had back then. So yeah. Anyways, yeah, we had that and like some assignments, where we'd have to photograph different subject matter again. And some of the ones I did was like, my mom was sitting on the steps. She was like, yeah, just I'll sit on the steps. You can take a photo of me, and it was fun. So, and then one of them was like me with my typewriter, my family's typewriter that we kept, a vintage one, right? And I had this long dark coat with sleeves and a silver lamp from my, my desk lamp, silver table lamp, and I moved a small square table into the living room temporarily in the middle, and then like turned off the lights and took a photograph, like dimmed it, and it was more so like really creepy, but it was supposed to be like a typewriter layer, that's what I was trying to create with the photo. I guess it did come out kind of cool. I shared that photo around. That was one of the earliest like photos I ever like tried, like project wise, like for actual school assignments. And there were other things, right? I photographed, obviously. And we had a few other assignments, like creating our own form of money, currency, a sense, but incorporating like our photo or a loved one's photo, like family member. And I think mine was called Darwa or something. I don't remember. It was around something similar to that. And I just remember it being like pops of color. There could have been like tigers and monkeys involved. And, I don't know. I guess it was sort of inspired by, I have half of my fam, right, in Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia. And, I was born in Minnesota. But, it was just interesting assignments, and I have, I think over the years my fam always did, photography and things like that. Growing up, I had, a Crayola 110 camera I took on field trips in a little fanny pack, and I'd take it to the fire station and all these places we'd go, for all those school field trips. There were so many school field trips, back then, so many fun ones too, and my fam had a lot of, those cameras that you can get developed real quick, from like, we usually got them from like Walgreens and stuff. So those were, we had a lot of those over the years. I think it was, like similar to those, like, I think there were the Kodak and, you've seen those Fuji cameras, right, too. So, the ones that you can develop pretty quickly, the flash cameras, and so we had a lot of those like quick snap type flash cameras and disposable cameras. We had tons of disposable cameras over the years, and we'd get them developed and stuff. So I think I never again really used Adobe Suite products. Sometimes I've had like briefly, my mom had like a MacBook, and I'd borrow it for like some video projects and stuff, just video editing and stuff. But and in work between like 2014 and 2017, I think somewhere between 2015 and 2017, I had done tech support for marketing departments that were, using Adobe Suite products, right? And then I became familiar a little bit more with them. There was like a spare license, and they let me like create some, design things like banners and stuff for the internet pages and stuff. But other than that, I don't have a lot of experience, to be honest, with Adobe Suite products. I don't. But I have, been able to like troubleshoot them, work with, Adobe support on fixing things, some tough stuff. And from time to time doing installations and, all of that stuff that I used to do back then, for like design applications and stuff too. And, CAD programs and engineering departments. So, anyway, sorry, I trailed off into memories there, but, I think, in middle school and high school, the, software program I used, actually, starting out with like my drawings, just like around that time was like Microsoft Paint, actually. That was all I was using, doing computer mouse drawn art. I never used a stylus, really. I tried, but it was really hard. I always felt it uncomfortable. I guess because I got accustomed to drawing with my computer mouse. I think that's why. And I had this ergonomic pad underneath, blue one. And, I would, draw cartoon characters. And eventually, like one of my friends back in middle school days, or their sister had recommended, or no, it was high school, I think. It may have been, in high school. I think it was like 9th or ish grade or something, probably around that time, or somewhere there. But, their sister had, recommended GIMP, and I tried it out and actually really loved it. It was very easy to use, good for like graphic design and, creating like animation even. I learned how to do layering myself and stuff. And yeah, it was so cool, so I was always so thankful being introduced to GIMP. It was a free program and very, very cool, to draw. I think it's still around today, GIMP and stuff. So it's pretty awesome. You can create some cool art in it. You would think, that, computer mouse drawn art would be really shaky and stuff like that, but I got it to a point where it was always smooth, and others couldn't really tell that I'd drawn it with a computer mouse too, which was pretty cool. So, over time I drew like, team members and others, right? Even coworkers for fun. So I was drawing people my whole life, people watching and stuff. That was always something I did. So anyways, back to, leading up to that. So, I think around, sometime in, 2020 something, I started using Canva, right? A lot of writers, poets, and artists use Canva today. It's very flexible, it's packed with features. And I know a lot of, authors who use it for, book building and layout design. But it's not the only program out there, or platform, I should say, for design and development, right? I have come across some in the community, in the publication community, right, who have mentioned Affinity Publisher. That's AFFINITY Publisher. I've never used it, but it looks pretty cool, it looks like it's very neat to use for like layouts and stuff. I checked the website a little bit ago and it said like $70 for like up for Windows and then they may have like annual plans or monthly ones. I'm not sure. I can't remember exactly. But yeah, check it out. That's not too bad, honestly. If it's like a one time, like $70 or something. It's hard to do monthly plans, right? I like things where you can pay one time and that's it. You get to, use that, program and software. Or one-time annual fees, not too bad, or small monthly fees, but nothing like, several $100s, right? Adobe Suite products, right? The thing about them, they can be very expensive and pricey, right? And cost, and we have limited budgets to work with, in the Lit Mag community. So, things that are cheaper and are packed with features are the way to go, right? The budget friendly and things like that. So, yeah, so the only ones I'm aware of, are, Canva and Affinity Publisher. I haven't used Affinity Publisher yet, and I've been thinking about trying it out or doing a test drive of it, or maybe they have a trial, but it looks pretty cool. There are some other tools for interior book design I've heard in the community use. I can't remember the names off the top of my head. If I happen to think of any, I would totally drop, them in the, description links and stuff. A few other, quite a few other ones exist out there. Canva's not the only thing out there. Affinity Publisher is not the only one out there. I'm sure if you type like, what are alternatives to Affinity Publisher out there, in a search, you'll come up with a list of results. And again, I haven't used a bunch of different tools in the publication space, really. I use like Microsoft Publisher from time to time, like once back in like between like 2014 and 2017, somewhere between there. To make like wedding card invites, for a coworker, those for their wedding guests and stuff. And then I used it a year and a half ago, I think, for just trying to get spine text. There are things like if you try to do like spine text in Canva or something, it's very tricky, but totally possible, but there's some dimensions that are too small that they're not supported. Like Microsoft Publisher, it's easier to get smaller dimensions than Canva in that. And in terms of layout, like in Canva, some sites, and platforms, let's say Blurb or, other places, Lulu even, they have those you can export out the template, right, and dimension boards, and then you can use those guidelines, and you can sort of import that into Canva and, do that. It's sort of like some of it, is very tough. I think in some platforms with spine text, it's usually, you have to stay within lines. Some platforms aren't super good about that, like being able to easily see like if it's outside the lines or things are different, than the preview sometimes, which is why it's important to, they're not 100% accurate, which is why it's important to get like a proof copy to see what it's like, physically printed. Of course, it costs money to do print tests and stuff, but spine text is something that's always been tricky for me. I was able to successfully eventually get spine text on majority of the issues back. One or two of them weren't, I wasn't 100% happy with like issue 2 and issue 4 spine text, it wasn't 100%, but the other issues, I was able to get it. And that's mostly because, again, it comes down to making sure you have page, consistency capped, right? And some years, sometimes issues, maybe maybe things happen where the issue wasn't the same exact right page number. But for the most part, going forwards, we're going to try to eliminate that, things like that, and maybe do shorter issues, and not necessarily, it's not always necessary to have spine text, right? But if you have thicker, again, I mentioned this on the podcast, thicker sized issues, it's a good idea to have that, let's say a bookshop picks it up and it's in the global distribution or Ingram network, right? It's easier for them to, display those, so others can see, the spine, or, it's, of course they could do front forward facing, right, stacking and stuff, but yeah. Anyways, yeah, so Canva, Affinity Publisher, those are the only ones I'm aware of, check them out. Yeah, I would say Affinity Publisher, I've heard good things about it, that it's not too bad, compared to Adobe. The thing with Adobe, right, recently they've introduced a lot of AI stuff, and Canva even has AI, features and stuff, but I don't use that stuff. I think the only time I've ever really toyed with AI is just for fun, right? We've all done that with like our profile picture or something like that, right? Just for fun. But I think, something that's really cool about in the AI space is, app building, right? Mobile app building. Now, the first ever major I ever had technically was mobile app development and programming, in community college. And then I transitioned to, technical management. But app development is very costly, expensive, hiring developers or even trying to develop yourself, even if you use something like AI for app building, right, for instance, right, it's not even accurate. You still have to have some working knowledge of code to iron things out. It's not always perfect, but it's pretty cool what you can do nowadays with, some of these app builders. I was just trying one for fun, a couple months back, and it's cool to see a concept you have, an idea, and to have it, be created in form, almost fully functional, not fully, but near functional, right? You still have to iron things out. But yeah, it's expensive. Like I've tried deploying apps again, like to the App Store and stuff, and just for fun, and some things like that. But I'm not a huge fan again of AI for like writing and art. I like traditional, art and writing coming from human beings, but I think it's cool, pretty nifty what you can do with like, the app development space and some tools that are able to, take an idea you have just off of, some things you say and to create like a layout from that, and there are, again, I mentioned some magazines that have their own apps, in the App Store, and they have various platforms and services. You can listen back to that episode on magazine apps and, subscription services and stuff. But yeah, anyways, just sharing. But yeah, I think that's all. This episode's pretty short. So yeah, I was just covering, some apps I've used, as an artist myself, GIMP is like the one, my go-to one for, that I, had, throughout the years, for my cartoon drawings and, things like that. Then I did a lot of sketch art, Faber-Castell marker. And, yeah, so, you can do a lot, in, with software and stuff like that. But, I think it's important to create your own template from scratch, right? If you're gonna, a lot of places have like pre-built templates and things like that, but think about it, how many others are using those templates, right? So it's important to create your own unique template and to use that across issues, make your own. Yeah. So, I had a lot of fun making the initial 5 Dippity issues, or technically 6, I should say. Some reboots happened because I was cleaning things up, and I trimmed down the first issue because of cost, right? I wasn't really aware of the cost, shifted when it was, distributed and stuff. So I trimmed it down, and, it's still rather thick issues. I think we were gone 170-ish on average, which is kind of high. And I think about trimming those down because, again, I learned about, some spaces where it's not free everywhere to upload your issue into subscription platforms. They do a per page cost, right? So that can get costly again. So there are a couple free ones I mentioned again on a few episodes back, but yeah. Anyways, yeah, so a ton of applications out there for building magazines and issues. I haven't, again, really used a whole bunch, though, personally, so I can only give those very few recommendations that I have. But yeah, I'm sure you'll come across more out there. And if you reach out to some other fellow editors or others, they're more than, willing to exchange that information, what they're using and stuff, especially through the CLMP membership. If you're part of that, a lot of really great discussions happen there, and knowledge exchanges and stuff. So I really love seeing that, So, yeah, so take care, guys. Yeah. And one PS note, guys, on this episode. I know all the episodes have PS notes basically at this point in time, but yeah, so I mentioned Blurb on this podcast episode, and something with Blurb, they actually have, I forgot, they have the Bookright software that's, WRIGHT, I believe. And I've tried that briefly, but honestly, I didn't find it super user-friendly for me. I find Canva to be a bit more user-friendly than Blurb's Bookright software, to be honest. But honestly, it's not too bad, if you end up using, Bookright, I think mostly, I don't know, I can't remember, but maybe it's more geared towards, photography books and stuff like that. But you can do book building in Bookright, obviously, right, the name. But I didn't really use that ever. I tried to briefly, but I was like, nah, I don't like how this is looking. So yeah, I didn't end up using their Bookright software. But they just have like this calculator of dimensions you can do, and then like some places like Lulu.com and Book Vault, a few other platforms out there that you can, again, export like the template with like guidelines and stuff, and sometimes I've been able to actually just place things, covers and spines within those guidelines and to lay everything out, like that. But it's like really tricky, right? You have to do a lot of tests to really get it that way. Some programs and applications have good grid lines and things you can easily do and check things like that. Again, I know some in the community do use Adobe InDesign or other Adobe Suite products, but I'm not super familiar with those extensively. Besides I've done some trials now and then of various Adobe Suite products just to learn a little bit more about them and to troubleshoot things in the past. But yeah, anyways, I just wanted to tack that on. So, Affinity Publisher is, one I'd probably check out, if you are, looking for something robust, maybe, or something that could, something else, besides Canva, So I think, let me see, I'm going on their website here. So I think they have like, the pricing here. I just want to check, like, yeah, it looks pretty extensive, like what you can do with it, it looks like you can, just like outright purchase it, or, oh yeah, here's the pricing. So yeah, I was right. Yeah, it's like $69.99 for Windows, and then it's like a one-time payment, and same with Mac OS operating systems. They even have like iPad, which is like $18.49. I'm not sure what the differences are between the iPad and the Windows version and the Mac. I'm not sure what that really is entailing. And then they have like a version 2 universal license, which is like I think it has Affinity Designer, Affinity Photo, and Affinity Publisher. For all operating systems, it's a bundle for like $164.99. So yeah, it's looks pretty cool though. I see multi-page spreads, and things like that. Reading order panels mentioned, and page management, reflow control. Yeah, so it has a lot of features in there. I don't know. Yeah, so it sounds pretty neat. I might try it out one day, but not sure at this time, yeah. So yeah, I just wanted to add that in, and state that, in terms of, alternatives, again, there's probably a few other ones for book interior design, but they may involve like some, I think some mentioned the community, like some programming knowledge or stuff like that. I'm not sure what those were named. I can't remember. Sorry, guys. But yeah, I will drop links again to these, and I hope this episode helped you, or gave you an idea of like some tools to check out. I've heard of like Scribus. I don't know, to like online searches and stuff, but I've never used that, or Scribus, I don't know how to really pronounce that, but I've heard others prefer Affinity Publisher over that, or once they left Adobe Suite or Scribus, they never went back. I mean, and once they left that for Affinity Publisher, they never went back to their old tools. So Affinity Publisher, there's probably some YouTube videos out there, just looking real quick, some quick courses and stuff like that on there, like quite a bit of like videos others have done on it. So it's seems something pretty interesting, and yeah, I think it's very flexible in terms of like moving around in it and stuff, yeah. So I think it's very comprehensive. Like you can do, I think, more than just obviously creating layouts for magazines and stuff, but like a lot of the platforms in existence, the ones I mentioned, Affinity Publisher, Canva, right? You can do marketing materials, you can create other things right within it, ads, etc. So, you want to invest in something, obviously, that's going to, meet all of your, all of the check boxes you have, personally. So yeah, what may work for me may not necessarily work for you, so you have to really, just, think about that and try it. So, yeah, um, I think, it's tough to, find, there's new platforms and technology coming out all the time. I'm sure, 5, 10, 15 years from now, we'll see a complete, a different platform or software out there for like, what's possible for publishers and stuff. Things keep getting, more advanced, more, and every year, right, new versions come out of things and new platforms and services. So it's very, very cool and neat. So, yeah, yeah, so I would say it's not necessary for you to like go straight to Adobe products or the Adobe Suite or InDesign or etc. There are other options out there if you're looking for something, perhaps low cost. Let's see how much Adobe is, guys. I'm just curious. I haven't looked at Adobe's cost, for quite some time. How much is Adobe InDesign? I'm just wondering, let's see. How much is it? I'm just curious. Let's see what their plans are like here. So it looks like Creative Cloud Pro is like $69 a month. Oof. And then like, yeah, they have, it looks like if you get individual applications, right, it's like $29 a month. Yeah, or InDesign's $22 a month. So yeah, think about that, you'd be spending quite a bit of money, still. If you still get, it's like around almost slightly under $300, right? So yeah, Affinity Publisher and Canva, they're still cheaper than that, So yeah, check it out, see if any of the ones I mentioned work for you. And, in the past, in the old days or good old days, not really good old days, but, several years back, when I was drawing more, GIMP again, something I used, GIMP, for, doing a lot of my digital drawings, with my wired computer mouse and creating graphics and things like that. And I've even, used it for, I designed labels and stuff in, in either Inkscape or GIMP, but GIMP was like my go-to for like drawing and creating graphics. And then sometimes I would do things in Inkscape, Inkscape. And those are, there are a lot of free, open source applications and stuff like that. So I never, I never paid fees for GIMP or Inkscape, by the way. So yeah. So I hope this helps, guys. And yeah, I just wanted to tack that on, yeah.